So thanks a lot, Gloriana, for this nice presentation, and thank you everyone for being here. I'm very glad to give this talk today. So today I'm going to talk about some building blocks of my PhD so far, which cope with the annotation of emotions and with the problem of disagreements that arise among annotators. So Gloriana already said some words about me. My name is Enrica Troiano. I am a PhD student at the Institute for Natural Language Processing, IMS, which is part of the Computer Science Department at the University of Stuttgart in Germany. There we do research in computational linguistics, and specifically my subfield of research is computational emotion analysis. And I am supervised by Roman Klinger and Sebastian Pado. The topic of my PhD is emotion style transfer. So in a nutshell, the goal of my PhD is to implement a system which is capable of paraphrasing a text while at the same time changing its emotional content. But today I'm not going to focus on this topic, on this task, and instead I'm going to focus on an upstream problem which I think also fits your interests better. And that is a problem related to the data that we use in emotion analysis. Okay, so we are talking about emotions. What is an emotion? In a way, I think it is easier to say what an emotion is not. An emotion is not a feeling, because feelings are conscious perceptions of our bodily changes, while emotions are not limited to our bodies, nor are they always conscious experiences. An emotion is also not exactly a mood, because moods are more vague and they are less weak than emotions. Also, moods are not always initiated by an event. Instead, emotions are always initiated by an event, specifically by those events which are relevant to our goals and our beliefs. And this makes emotions a relational concept. We are happy because of something. We are angry at someone. We are sad about something. All these ideas were nicely put together by Scherer, who said that an emotion is an episode of interrelated, synchronized changes. These changes happen in response to the evaluation of an external or internal stimulus event, and that event is relevant to major concerns of the organism. So the first thing that's necessary for an event to happen, for an emotion to happen, is an event, like there is a crocodile and I see a crocodile. According to Scherer, a number of changes happen to me at the sight of this animal. I have some bodily symptoms, like I start trembling, I start sweating, my heart pumps faster. I have action tendencies, like I am ready to run away from the stimulus. I have some facial and vocal expressions. My eyes go wide open and my voice is not steady if I try to talk. And I have the impression that all this feels very bad. Now, importantly, all these changes happen while I am evaluating the event. They happen in response to my cognitive appraisal of the event. I ask myself, is this event unexpected? Do I have control over it? And again, these types of evaluations are not necessarily conscious. And the reason why I'm going in so much detail into all the components of an emotion is that all of them have a linguistic counterpart. So all of them have a specific way in which they can be realized in text. And all of them basically account for a small bit of my emotional experience. We have event, a crocodile appeared. Bodily symptoms, I couldn't stop shaking. Action tendencies, run. Expression, my eyes went wide open. Feeling, that didn't feel good. And cognitive appraisal, I had no way out. So these are some example texts that we deal with in emotion analysis. And these are the texts that we use to train our machine learning models. Here is a typical pipeline that we use in emotion analysis, and I guess most of you are already familiar with it. But just to bring everyone on the same page, so we start with a corpus of texts. In general, they are sentences. And these sentences are labeled with an emotion phenomenon, like joy, or anger, or trust. We use these texts to train the models, which learn to recognize the emotion phenomena thanks to some linguistic patterns that are associated to them. Next, we use part of the texts coming from our corpus in order to evaluate how well the model learned to recognize such phenomena. And in case we are happy about its performance, then we can use the model on new data. But before we involve ourselves with this emotion modeling, we have to think about the data, how to collect appropriate emotion data. And if you think about it, there exists already available out there some type of data that people spontaneously tag with emotions. I'm giving a presentation today, #happy. So sometimes the authors of tweets use these emotion labels. And in emotion analysis, we can use these labels, we can use these hashtags as labels because they tell us what emotion the author of a tweet wanted to convey, or at least what emotion the author of a tweet was feeling at the moment of producing the text. But of course, sometimes tweets contain some sarcasm, yet another working weekend, #happy. And in these cases, the emotion hashtags are not very useful for us. So another way to go about data collection is to first gather the text and then to ask external annotators to recognize some emotion phenomena in the text. And what are these emotion phenomena that we can ask the annotators about? Well, the first and most straightforward thing to ask would be the discrete emotion expressed by the text. We give annotators a set of labels, and out of this set, they can choose either one or many emotions that are expressed in the text. In the case of "a crocodile appeared," they may choose, for instance, the label fear. Now, the specific types of emotions that we give to the annotators depend on the theory, the psychological theory that we follow. According to Ekman, we have 6 emotions, 6 basic emotions: fear, surprise, joy, sadness, shame, and anger. And these emotions are associated to some prototypical facial expressions, which you see my supervisor do in this picture. However, we can also use richer and more structured emotion inventories. For instance, we can use Plachik's wheel, in which we have emotions at different intensities, like serenity, joy, and ecstasy. We also have emotion mixtures, for instance, love, which is a compound of joy and trust. And emotions are organized according to opposite pairs. For instance, joy is at the extreme opposite of sadness. Other than this, we can ask annotators to inform us about the intensity of the emotion. Emotional intensity is basically the magnitude of an emotional experience, and people usually rate that either on a continuous scale, for instance, from 0 to 1, or on an ordinal scale. On top of that, we can ask annotators to inform us about the cognitive appraisal that underlies the discrete emotions. So remember that I told you when I see a crocodile, I evaluate whether I have control over this event, whether the stimulus was expected. But this was a simplification because when we evaluate an event, we do that along many different dimensions. And these dimensions include, but are not limited to, novelty. We evaluate whether the event is familiar to us, our urgency to act, our potential to cope with the possible consequences of the event. We evaluate whether we can predict the outcome of the event and whether the event is aligned with our goals. Now, these are just some of the emotion phenomena that we can ask the annotators to rate. And these are the emotion phenomena I'm going to talk about today. Now, when we collect these annotations, we would like the annotators to agree, because if annotators reach a high level of agreement, then we can somewhat rest assured that we collected good quality data. But unfortunately, this is easier said than done, and when it comes to emotions, people tend to disagree a lot. And here's why. So let's focus on the case of discrete emotions. And let's consider these two examples. I'm scared of crocodiles, and a crocodile appeared. In the first example, we have the word scared, which makes it explicit that the emotion associated to this text is fear. But in the other example, we have no explicit emotion mentioned. This is an implicit emotion expression. And annotators who have to rate this example have to resort to some sort of external knowledge, which includes their past experience, their cultural background, their personal goals, their personal preferences. And of course, this makes the task of annotating emotions a very subjective one. Not only that, but different emotions can occur together. I can be both scared and surprised at the same time. I can be happy and surprised. So annotators could choose either of these two labels, and both of them would be correct, but still this would count as a disagreement. On top of that, an emotion can be judged from many different perspectives. And if we don't make it clear in our guidelines from what perspectives the annotators have to judge the emotion, then we incur the risk of disagreements. What are these perspectives? Well, there is the perspective of the text. And from this perspective, we could say that this text, a crocodile appeared, is neutral because it simply describes an event. But we can also try and reconstruct the emotion of the writer, either the emotion that the writer felt when the event happened, or the emotion that the writer felt while producing the text, or the emotion that the writer wanted to elicit in the readers. At the same time, we can judge the emotion from our own perspective. What type of emotion does this text elicit in us? Collecting consistent annotations in emotion analysis is pretty difficult. And today we will take on this challenge, and we will start by considering the effect of confidence and intensity ratings on disagreements about emotions. And next we will consider the disagreements that arise when annotating emotion components, the appraisals that I mentioned earlier. So the first of these works is a joint work with my two supervisors, and that's what we describe in a paper called Emotion Ratings, How Intensity, Annotation Confidence, and Agreements Are Entangled. All right, so the goal of this paper was to try and better understand disagreements with respect to some factors that we can more easily quantify compared to people's past experience, people's beliefs, and personal preferences. So we started from three considerations. The first consideration was that judging emotions is a very subjective task, as we have seen, and this leads to disagreements. The second consideration is that the annotators have a sort of an intuition of how trustworthy their performance is, meaning when they recognize an emotion in text, at the same time, they reflect upon their own performance, and they can tell us whether they think their answer is correct. So this is writer's confidence, and it is basically a self-perception. The last consideration that we do is that emotions can be expressed at different intensities. If you remember, in Platschik's wheel, we had serenity, joy, and ecstasy. So why do we care about writer's confidence and emotion intensity? Because, first of all, they are factors that we can quantify, we can measure them, and they somehow seem related to the subjectivity of annotating emotions, to the disagreements that arise when annotating discrete emotion labels. One could expect, for instance, that people disagree more when they are not very confident about their annotation choices. Or to put it the other way around, people are more likely to agree if they think they recognize the correct emotion in text. At the same time, confidence seems to be related to intensity. Intuitively, the higher intensity, the higher confidence. meaning that people may be more confident that they recognize the correct emotion in text if such emotion is expressed with a high intensity. So accordingly, we asked 2 research questions. The first research question is, are disagreements related to confidence? And the second research question is, are confidence and intensity related? So to answer these 2 research questions, we set up an annotation study for which we collected 700 sentences from the corpus of contemporary American English. And we asked 3 annotators to participate in our study. And for us, in emotion analysis, 3 annotators is an acceptable number of judges. For each sentence, the annotators had to answer the question, is the text emotional? So this was just a binary decision, because a text could either be emotional or neutral. So yeah, with respect to the rich set of emotion inventories that I showed you earlier, this is like a simplification. We don't want to know what emotion people recognize in text, but rather whether they recognize any. And in case the annotators said that a sentence was emotional, then they had to rate their own confidence. And they did that on a scale from 1 to 3, where 1 is the lowest degree of confidence and 3 is the highest. They also had to rate the intensity of such emotion, again on a scale from 1 to 3, where 3 is the highest level of intensity. So here I have a couple of examples for you to put yourselves in the shoes of the annotators, and yeah, just to have a feeling of how this annotation task was. We have the new version of our product will be released soon. She reached her boiling point, and I passed the exam. And maybe you can type in the chat whether you think that some of these texts contain an emotion, which one, how confident you are about this answer, and how intense you perceive such emotion to be. Ooh, I can't see the chat for some reason.
I can see it, so if something comes up, I can tell you.
Okay, so there is no answer?
Not yet. I guess maybe people are still making up their minds. I mean, I can give my guesses. I see. So Paul says, I think B is the most emotional, which I would agree. There's Raffaella Bottini who says A is neutral, B has emotion, and C is neutral. Okay.
Okay, so we are already in disagreement, I guess, because I would say C actually contains an emotion. But okay, so this was just to give you a feeling. We can move on.
Some more comments, but we can leave it for later, yeah.
Yes, I can't see the chat, unfortunately. Well, okay. So yeah, once we collected these types of annotations, we computed the Inter-annotator Agreement. So we have on the left Cohen's kappa, which we computed for pairs of annotators. And on the right, we have Fly's kappa for the 3 annotators. As you may judge by yourself, these numbers are pretty unsatisfactory. The highest agreement is 0.43. So overall, these numbers tell us that there is not a good agreement among the annotators. And in part, this may be due to the fact that we asked annotators to rate the text from their own reader's perspective, which makes the task especially subjective. But yeah, even in this simplified setting with only 2 discrete emotion labels, we have disagreements. And now we can answer the question, are disagreements related to confidence? Remember that confidence was given for all those items and only for those items that were deemed emotional. And that was rated on a scale from 1 to 3, which are the numbers that you see now on the tables. So we can approach this question from 2 different angles. We can look at Inter-annotator Agreement again, but for different levels of confidence. And we can have a look at the disagreement counts to better understand the cases in which the disagreements arise. So let's first consider the Inter-annotator Agreement, the table on the left. Now the idea is to compute flies kappa again, but first we apply a sort of a post-processing to the collected annotations. We accept as emotional only those items on which all annotators had the same confidence rating. So for instance, we accept as emotional only those items for which all annotators had confidence equal to 1. We turn into neutral all the other answers, and we compute flies kappa on that data. Next, we accept as emotional only those answers for which all annotators had confidence equal to 2, and we turn into neutral the other answers, and we compute flies kappa on those data items. And we do the same for the highest level of confidence. Once more, we can see that we don't have a good agreement among the annotators. However, agreement is especially low for the lowest degree of confidence, and it increases substantially by considering higher levels of confidence. So what we learn here is that people agree more when they are more confident about their answers. But let's now have a look at when the disagreements arise. So let's focus on the rightmost table. These are the disagreements counts divided by confidence level again. And they are the disagreements which arise for one pair of annotators. So here I'm just reporting an example, but this is representative for all of them, for all other annotator pairs. Okay, what do we see? We see that these two annotators tend to disagree when the one who chooses the emotion label does so with a very low confidence. Such disagreements diminish when the annotator is slightly more confident, and it is never the case that these two annotators disagree if the one who picks the emotion label does so with extreme confidence. So overall, these numbers tell us that people tend to agree more when they are more confident about their answers. And they also tell us that people's judgments are not totally incompatible, even if they disagree, because they tend to disagree when one of them is not confident about the emotion she recognized in the text. This is not very surprising. That's basically the assumption we made at the beginning. But when we applied the same operations to the answers that we collected for intensity, we found similar results. We found that flies kappa increases by considering increasing higher levels of intensity. And we also see that people never disagree when the emotion is perceived with a high intensity. So disagreements are related to confidence, but they are also related to the intensity with which the emotion is expressed. Okay, that was a first signal that intensity and confidence may be related, but let's answer this question more properly. So we are looking here at Spearman's correlation coefficient, which we computed for each annotator, taking their ratings for confidence and their ratings for intensity. And if you remember, we have a rating for confidence for all those items for which we have also a rating for intensity. These numbers tell us that there is a strong positive correlation between confidence and intensity for all annotators. But we can also have a better look at what is going on here. We can have a look at how many items an annotator rated with a certain level of confidence and with a certain intensity. The way we read this heat map is pretty straightforward. We have 120 items that one annotator rated with intensity 1 and confidence 1. We have 152 items rated with intensity 2 and confidence 2. And what is striking about this heat map is that the annotator very rarely annotated an instance with extreme confidence while perceiving intensity as very low. And vice versa, the annotator it is never the case that the annotator perceived extreme intensity, but was not very sure about her answer. So we can now put all this information together. Confidence and intensity are not only related, but they are correlated. As one increases, so does the other. Moreover, both confidence and intensity are related to disagreements that arise on discrete emotion labels. So, in other words, what we have seen is that disagreements are systematics. There are patterns in disagreements because annotators tend to disagree when they are not certain about their performance. But these types of patterns do not emerge if we only use discrete emotion labels. We need this type of additional information. And I guess if there is a take-home message from this study, it is that confidence seems to be an important dimension to rate, to ask annotators to rate, because in a way it tells us when the annotators themselves predicted to disagree. Okay, so far we have considered disagreements only on discrete emotion labels, and we have used intensity as an additional layer of information that can be used to understand disagreements. But now we move on to the disagreements that arise when annotating cognitive appraisals. Cognitive appraisals, if you remember, are an aspect of emotions which is related to the evaluation of events. I told you that in case I see a crocodile, I evaluate whether I have control over it, whether it is unexpected, but this was just a simplification. And yeah, as I told you, we can evaluate the event along many more dimensions. According to Smith and Ellsworth, these dimensions are pleasantness. We evaluate whether the situation was pleasant. Effort. We evaluate whether the situation requires us to expend physical or mental effort. Certainty. We evaluate whether we are understanding what is going on. Attention. We evaluate whether the situation requires us to focus more or whether we want to attend the situation further. Then we have responsibility, according to which we evaluate if we are responsible for bringing about the situation. And we have control. We evaluate whether we can change the development of the situation. These dimensions give us a structured way to differentiate different emotions, in the sense that specific emotions may be differently associated to these dimensions. For instance, joy is more likely to arise in a pleasant situation, one in which I don't have to expend effort, one in which I am certain about what is going on, and one in which I feel like I am in control. Instead, fear is more likely to occur when the situation is not pleasant, when the situation requires me to expend some effort, either physical or mental, whether I am not so certain, I'm not so sure about what is going on. I see the crocodile and I'm sure about that, but I'm not sure about how the event is developing. And so accordingly, I feel like I am not in control of the situation. Why do we care about annotating appraisals? Well, because appraisals are a fundamental component of emotions, in the sense that they account for the ways in which emotions are elicited. I'm not scared because I see a crocodile, but I'm scared for how I evaluate the crocodile. I evaluate it as dangerous. And this type of evaluation is not only necessary for people in concrete situations when they actually feel emotions in response to an event, but this evaluation may be necessary also for the annotators who have to interpret the text, especially for those texts in which we have no explicit emotion mentioned, like in the sentence, "a crocodile appeared." They have to reconstruct the situation and imagine how they would appraise that. So I consider the problem of annotating appraisals in this joint work with Jan Hoffman and Roman Klinger, one of my supervisors. And in this paper, we analyze different strategies to collect annotations of appraisals. And the appraisals that we consider are based on those by Smith and Ellsworth. Okay, so we thought that in order to approach the problem of annotating appraisals, the most appropriate type of data would be event descriptions, because that requires the annotators to reconstruct the appraisal. We took these descriptions from the UCREL corpus, which is a corpus of texts in English, and which contains sentences that sound something like this. I felt ... when my mom offered me curry. I felt ... because I can't stand when people lie. Now, these texts were produced by writers in order to recount an experience, a real-life experience, in which they felt a specific emotion. One of 7, either anger or disgust or fear, guilt, joy, sadness, or shame. So these texts are actually labeled with emotions, but we have no emotion word inside the text. And that's why we have the 3 dots. The emotion words were removed on purpose because, to create implicit emotion expressions. Out of the 1001 texts available in EN-ICR, we only used 2,210, sorry, and we asked 2 human judges to participate in this study. And this is the task that they had to do. So for each dimension, they had to tell us whether the dimension holds or not for a given text. And here, with respect to the other study, we wanted them to interpret the text from the writer perspective. We wanted the annotators to try and reconstruct the appraisal that the writer of the description made at the moment of experiencing the event. I think you can have a better idea of this task if you try and do it yourself. So here is an example sentence that we showed the annotators. I felt ... when I was abseiling down a cliff face. So you can evaluate by yourself whether at the time when the event happened, the writer found that the event was pleasant, had to expend mental or physical effort to deal with the situation, whether the writer was certain about what was happening, whether the writer wanted to devote further attention to the event, whether he or she was responsible for the situation, he or she found to be in control of the situation, or found that the event could not have been changed or influenced by anyone. And now I would like to ask you a question. If I told you that this sentence was produced to recount an event in which the writer felt joy, would you change your annotation? How about pleasantness? How about effort? So we just simulated one of the annotation strategies that we used. In this strategy, we showed the annotators only the text, and they had to reconstruct the appraisal that the writer of the text made originally. But of course, this type of annotation incurs 2 types of disagreements. First, people can disagree on the appraisal that they reconstruct, and second, and accordingly, they disagree on the discrete emotions that they recognize in the text. So we also tried another annotation setup. We basically repeated the same annotation with the same data and with the same people, but we gave the annotators access to the emotion for which the text was produced. So in this setup, the annotators had to reconstruct the appraisal by looking both at the text and at the emotion. And here's what happens. So let's first look at the Inter-annotator Agreement that we find when the annotators do not have access to the emotion. This is Cohen's kappa. We have only 2 annotators, remember, and we computed it for each dimension of appraisal. The average Cohen's kappa is 0.55, and this is what happens when we show the annotators the emotion. We have an average Cohen's kappa of 68, so it increases of 13 points. And as you notice, this agreement increases for all the dimensions, except for self-control, actually, which I would say is a pretty difficult dimension to rate. So overall, what these numbers tell us is that knowing the emotion allows for more consistent appraisal reconstruction. Giving annotations more information about cognitive phenomena allows them to have more aligned intuitions. And indeed, for the example that I showed you moments ago, the annotators came to agree, for instance, on the dimension of effort, on the dimension of pleasantness, on the dimension of responsibility, and the dimension of situational control when they were given the emotion for which the text was produced. Okay, so what have we learned from these 2 studies? One thing we learned is that disagreements are systematic. There are patterns in disagreements in the sense that people disagree less if they are more confident about their annotation choices and if the perceived emotion intensity is high. But if these disagreements are systematic, if there are patterns in disagreements, then it means that maybe such disagreements are not a symptom of unreliability, at least not necessarily. And in fact, the annotators themselves predicted when they thought they would disagree with the others. So in a way, this is good news, but it also points to a problem, which is not a new problem in annotation studies, and that's the problem that typical measures of inter-annotator agreement tend to underestimate the quality of data because they treat random disagreements and systematic disagreements in the same way. They do not account for patterns of disagreements. And so I think we can solve the situation, for instance, by asking annotators to rate their confidence. And for instance, we may assign different weights to different types of disagreements. We may want to punish more disagreements that arise when annotators are extremely confident of their answers, compared to disagreements that arise when annotators are unsure about their performance. Another lesson we learned is that annotation is a multidimensional problem. Usually in annotation studies, we ask people to annotate only individual dimensions, but it is most often the case that decisions involve multiple levels of of information. And yeah, I think this is why we found that confidence and intensity are correlated, and also why we found that giving additional information to the annotators allow them to annotate appraisals better. So observing interaction among different cognitive and emotional phenomena is beneficial, but at the same time, it opens a couple of problems. Do intensity corpora contain the right type of annotations? Given that intensity and confidence are correlated, it is possible that people mix these two concepts up, and therefore that all those corpora that were originally designed to contain intensity ratings actually model the other variable, model confidence. And this is a problem also for modeling studies which are based on these corpora. Yet another problem is that, giving annotators additional information may improve the way in which they annotate. However, this gives them an unfair advantage compared to automatic classifiers, which do not necessarily have access to multiple information relative to the emotion phenomena that are expressed in text. So for me, all this information is useful for the ultimate goal of emotion style transfer. I mentioned this at the very beginning. My goal is to create a system that is able to rewrite a text while changing the emotional content of the text, but without losing too much of the semantic content. For instance, if I'm given a sentence or a text which expresses an emotion like joy, yeah, sure, I've loved it. The concert hall was vibrant. Then I want my system to produce a paraphrase which conveys more or less the same meaning, but with another emotion connotation, like annoyance. I loved it. Yeah, sure. The concert hall was bursting with chaos. And so knowing that different types of emotion phenomena interact with each other for me is very useful, because it tells me that I should consider multiple information at once when doing this transfer. For instance, I may want to consider emotion intensity, because I've seen that intensity can have an impact on how people judge the emotion of the text. And at the end, it will be people who determine whether my system is a successful one, because they will decide what is the emotion that is in the given text, and whether the text produced by my system actually expresses the target emotion, the desired emotion that I want.